Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories, the home of love, passion, and deep emotions. Every time you press play, every time you leave a comment, you remind me that this family is built on love. You are my heart, my joy, my blessing, and I cherish you deeply. Before we begin, let's take a moment to embrace love, hope, and endless blessings together. A prayer of love, protection, and overflowing blessings for my beautiful family. Heavenly Father, with a heart overflowing with gratitude, I come before you today, lifting up this incredible family that you have brought together from every corner of the world. Though we are miles apart, our hearts beat as one, united in love, kindness, and the beauty of human connection. Lord, I ask you to shower them with your boundless grace. Let every ear that hears my voice be filled with peace, every heart be filled with love, and every home be filled with abundance. For those feeling weary, renew their strength. For those carrying burdens, lift them up. For those searching for love, remind them they are already deeply cherished. Wipe away every tear, replace every fear with faith, and turn every struggle into a testimony of victory. May laughter fill their days, success follow their dreams, and love embrace them like the warmest light. This family is blessed beyond measure. This family is divinely favored, and no force in this world can dim our glow. With all the love in my heart, I say Amen. My beautiful family, do you feel my love? Every story I tell, every emotion I pour into my words is for you. Do you feel it? Does my storytelling touch your heart? Let me know in the comments, because your love and support fuel my soul and inspire me to bring you more. Let's take attendance, the Mr. Peter Stories way. My beautiful family, drop your country in the comments. Let's celebrate our unity, our strength, and the Black excellence that has kept our stories alive for generations. Here are some of the most legendary Black storytellers from around the world, voices of power, wisdom, and love. United States, Maya Angelou, the poet who turned pain into beauty, struggles into strength, and words into a legacy of love. Ghana, Ama Ata Aidu, a storyteller whose words carried the heartbeat of Africa, weaving tales of love, power, and heritage. South Africa, Zakes Emda, a literary genius who captured the resilience of a nation, reminding us that our history is a story worth telling. Nigeria, Chinua Achebe, the master storyteller who painted Africa's truth with words so powerful they shaped generations. Jamaica, Louise Bennett Coverley, Miss Lou, the guardian of Jamaican culture, who made storytelling a celebration of identity and pride. Haiti, Edwidge Danticat, a writer whose words carried the spirit of her ancestors, turning history into unforgettable stories. Trinidad and Tobago, Earl Lovelace, a literary king whose words captured the rhythm, struggles, and beauty of Caribbean life. Ethiopia, Maaza Mengistu, a voice of strength, whose stories shine a light on Ethiopia's rich past and powerful future. Brazil, Conceição Evaristo, a poet who refused to let Black Brazilian history be forgotten, turning pain into poetry. Cuba, Nancy Morejon, a literary queen who celebrated the power, resilience, and love of Afro-Cuban culture. Senegal, Mariama Ba, a fearless storyteller whose words uplifted African women and inspired hearts around the world. Cameroon, Mongo Biti, a bold and unapologetic voice who never stopped fighting for truth, justice, and African pride. Where are you watching from? Drop your country below, and let's fill this space with love, power, and unity. Now let's dive into today's story, with passion, with heart, and with the deepest love for you, my beautiful family. The crystal champagne flute felt cool against Masai Mali's fingers as she surveyed the opulent ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. New York Fashion Week's most exclusive gala glittered around her, but she felt distinctly out of place despite her carefully chosen crimson gown. The dress had cost a month's rent, an extravagance she could ill afford, but tonight was about making impressions. 3 potential investors had already dismissed her with patronizing smiles when she'd mentioned her business concept. The 4th had openly laughed. At 32, Masai had expected her MBA from Columbia and 5 years of industry experience would open doors. Instead, she'd spent 6 months watching white men with half her qualifications secure funding for mediocre ideas, while her vision for an ethical fashion enterprise that would empower immigrant women was deemed too niche or not commercially viable. She placed her empty glass on a passing tray and straightened her shoulders. The night wasn't over. Somewhere in this room was Catherine Vega, the angel investor known for supporting female entrepreneurs. If Masai could just... "You're wasting your time with Vega," a deep voice said behind her. "She's all talk, no capital." Masai turned, a sharp retort ready on her lips. The words died unsaid. The man before her stood well over 6 feet, his bespoke tuxedo accentuating broad shoulders and a physique that spoke of disciplined athleticism rather than gym vanity. But it was his face that momentarily robbed her of speech. Strong jaw, sculpted cheekbones, and eyes the color of aged whiskey, watching her with unexpected intensity. Justin Gatlin. She recognized him instantly from countless magazine covers and business profiles. The self-made billionaire who'd transformed a small design label into Elegance Unlimited, the most prestigious women's wear empire in the country. "I wasn't aware my business strategy was announced over the PA system," she recovered, lifting her chin slightly. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Your conversation with Preston carried. He's always been loud when he's dismissive." His eyes traveled down her form in a swift but thorough assessment. "He's also consistently wrong about anything innovative." Masai crossed her arms. "And you know what I pitched him because I was eavesdropping," Justin admitted without a hint of embarrassment. When the most striking woman in the room starts talking about ethical supply chains and empowerment programs for immigrant women in fashion, I pay attention. Before Masai could respond, they were interrupted by a British fashion editor launching into a debate about sustainable practices in luxury fashion. To her surprise, Justin deflected the attention to her. "Ms. Molly has some compelling thoughts on that subject," he said, his eyes never leaving her face. "Why don't you share your perspective on how sustainable production can actually enhance profit margins?" For the next 20 minutes, Masai found herself the center of a growing circle of industry leaders, articulating her vision with a confidence born of deep expertise. Throughout, she was acutely aware of Justin watching her, not with the dismissive tolerance she'd grown accustomed to, but with genuine interest. When the crowd finally dispersed, Justin handed her a fresh glass of champagne. "Impressive. Most people in this room talk sustainability as a marketing ploy. You actually understand the economics." "I spent 2 years consulting for manufacturing plants in Ethiopia and Bangladesh," she said. "The exploitation I witnessed wasn't just morally reprehensible, it was inefficient business. And now you want to create an alternative model." It wasn't a question. "I want to build a business that proves ethics and profitability aren't mutually exclusive, while creating opportunities for women who deserve them." Masai met his gaze directly. "And contrary to what you might think, I'm not wasting my time. I'll find my investor." Justin studied her for a long moment. The ambient noise of the gala seemed to fade as something electric passed between them. "You believe your model can succeed in this cutthroat industry?" he asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than condescending. "I don't just believe it. I've run the numbers," Masai replied firmly. Ethical production reduces turnover, increases quality, and creates brand loyalty that offsets higher initial costs. "Show me," he challenged, though without hostility. "Not the polished investor pitch, the actual financial models." Their conversation shifted into detailed business analysis, Justin asking pointed questions that probed the substance of her concept, rather than dismissing it outright. His understanding of supply chain economics revealed a depth beyond the celebrity CEO image perpetuated in media profiles. "Your approach is unconventional," he finally said, "but the fundamentals are sound. Most sustainable fashion concepts focus on materials rather than labor practices. You've identified the industry's true vulnerability." "Which is why it needs to change," Masai pressed. "Not just for ethical reasons, but for long-term viability." Justin retrieved a card from his inner pocket and offered it to her. "My private number. Call me tomorrow. I'd like to hear more about your concept, specifically the ownership structure for your immigrant workers." Their fingers brushed as she took the card, and Masai felt an involuntary shiver of awareness. She'd read about Justin Gatlin's ruthlessness in business, his reputation as a demanding perfectionist who accepted nothing short of excellence. What she hadn't been prepared for was the raw magnetism of the man in person. "I'm not looking for a mentor, Mr. Gatlin," she said carefully. His smile was slow and knowing. "Neither am I, Ms. Mali." As he walked away, Masai felt simultaneously relieved and bereft of his presence. She glanced down at the card in her hand, embossed with just his name and a number. No title, no company logo. The simplicity spoke of a man secure enough in his identity to need no introduction. She slipped the card into her clutch, telling herself she wouldn't call. She hadn't come to New York to become another powerful man's protege, or worse, his diversion. She'd come to build something lasting, something meaningful, something that was entirely her own. Yet, even as she navigated the remainder of the evening, introducing herself to potential connections and exchanging business cards, she remained conscious of Justin Gatlin across the room. Occasionally, she would feel the weight of his gaze upon her, and each time she looked up, their eyes would meet with an awareness that defied the crowded space between them. By the time Masai stepped into the cool night air hours later, she knew with absolute certainty that she would call him tomorrow. What remained to be seen was whether that decision would prove to be her making or her undoing. Chapter 2. The Pursuit. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Masai found herself ascending in Justin's private elevator, her heart racing with a mixture of professional anticipation and something more dangerous. Their previous interactions had revealed layers of a man far more complex than his public persona suggested. The day after the gala, an Elegance Unlimited courier had arrived at her modest Brooklyn apartment with a garment bag containing a midnight blue power suit that fit her as though it had been custom-tailored. The handwritten note simply read, "For your investor meetings. They respond to packaging, even while you change their perceptions of content. J." She'd been tempted to return it, but practicality won out. The next day, wearing the suit, she'd secured her first serious meeting with a venture capital firm. Then came the accidental encounters, Justin appearing at the same industry panel, suggesting they share a car to their next destinations, sliding into the seat beside her at a sustainable fashion symposium, arranging adjacent reservations at 11 Madison Park, where their tables were mysteriously combined due to booking errors. Each interaction revealed layers of a man far more complex than his public persona suggested. Justin Gatlin asked questions and, more surprisingly, actually listened to her answers. He challenged her assumptions about market penetration strategies, but acknowledged the validity of her ethical framework. He remembered details from their conversations that even she had forgotten. Now, as the elevator ascended to his penthouse for what he'd termed a business dinner, Masai reminded herself of the boundaries she'd established. This was professional networking, nothing more. The fact that her body hummed with awareness whenever he stood near her was irrelevant, a biological reaction she could acknowledge and ignore. The elevator doors opened directly into his apartment, and her careful composure faltered. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a Manhattan twilight, the city transitioning into its nighttime brilliance. The space was unexpectedly warm, not the sterile showcase she'd anticipated, but a thoughtfully designed home with African art pieces she recognized alongside contemporary furnishings. "My father collected art from across the continent," Justin said, emerging from what appeared to be a kitchen area, suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to reveal corded forearms. Those Dogon sculptures were his prized possessions. Masai moved toward the display, genuine interest overriding her self-consciousness. "My father would be envious. He tried for years to acquire pieces like these." "Your father has good taste," Justin replied, handing her a glass of wine. "Tell me about him." "He's an architect, specializes in sustainable community development projects," Masai explained, accepting the glass. "He taught at Columbia for 20 years before returning to Kenya to implement water conservation housing designs in drought-affected regions." "And your mother?" "Professor of economics at New York University. She specializes in developmental economics, focused on women's financial empowerment." Masai smiled slightly. "Now you understand where my business concept originated. Parents who combined practical building skills with economic theory and social consciousness," Justin observed. "No wonder you're challenging industry assumptions." That simple question unlocked a conversation that flowed effortlessly through dinner. A meal, Justin revealed he had prepared himself, a skill acquired from his Jamaican grandmother. As they moved to the seating area afterward, the professional pretense between them grew increasingly thin. "You mentioned your father's art collection," Masai said carefully. "Were you close to him?" Something shifted in Justin's expression, a shadow crossing his features. "He was a brilliant painter, had exhibitions in Paris and Rome when I was young, but he was better at creating beauty than managing money." He took a measured sip of wine. "When I was 16, he died of pancreatic cancer. No health insurance, no savings." "I'm sorry," Masai said softly, understanding this wasn't the polished narrative from his press profiles. "My mother took 3 jobs to keep us afloat, me and my 2 younger siblings. Working night shifts, cleaning offices, days as a receptionist, weekends at a grocery store." His jaw tightened. By 45, her heart gave out from the strain. The raw honesty of his words created a sudden intimacy between them. This wasn't the polished narrative from his interviews, but something unvarnished and true. "So that's why you built your business," Masai realized. "Financial security." "Security became everything," he acknowledged, meeting her eyes directly. "I promised myself I would never be vulnerable like that. Never watch someone I love work themselves to death because of financial precarity." Understanding bloomed in Masai. His reputation for ruthless efficiency, his focus on profit margins, his careful control of all variables in his business suddenly made sense, not as mere ambition, but as deep-seated psychological protection. "And yet here you are, interested in a business model that prioritizes ethics over maximum profit," she observed. "That seems contradictory." "Perhaps I'm evolving," Justin replied, his eyes holding hers with unexpected vulnerability. "Or perhaps your arguments about long-term sustainability being more valuable than short-term gains are simply good business." Outside, lightning flashed unexpectedly, illuminating the darkening sky. Seconds later, thunder rumbled and rain began lashing against the windows with startling ferocity. The summer storm had appeared with the same sudden intensity as the tension now building between them. Masai set down her wine glass and stood. "I should go before this gets worse." Justin rose as well, standing close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne. The forecast says it's just beginning. They both knew he wasn't talking about the weather. "This is a complication I don't need," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I came to New York to build something meaningful, not to what, Masai?" His voice had dropped lower, the timbre of it seeming to resonate in her chest. "Not to get sidetracked by whatever this is." "And what is this?" He stepped closer, not touching her, but occupying her space in a way that made her intensely aware of every inch of her body. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the apartment into darkness as the storm knocked out power to the block. In the sudden absence of artificial light, the storm's lightning cast dramatic shadows across Justin's features, highlighting the sharp angles of his face and the intensity of his gaze. "I should go," she repeated, but didn't move. "The elevators won't work," he said simply. "You're welcome to wait it out." In the next flash of lightning, she saw him clearly. Not the billionaire, not the business icon, but the man watching her with undisguised desire and something that looked remarkably like uncertainty. When he took her hand and led her toward the balcony doors, she followed without resistance. They stepped outside under the shelter of the overhang, the rain creating a curtain of water before them, the air electric with ozone and unspoken possibility. "I've been thinking about you since the moment I saw you," Justin admitted, his voice nearly lost in a roll of thunder. "Not just your business proposal. You." Masai felt a flicker of something dangerous ignite within her. This would complicate everything. Some things are worth complicating. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. "Tell me to stop, and I will." The rain intensified, droplets catching in his eyelashes and trailing down his face like tears. Masai knew she stood at a precipice. One step would change everything. The rational part of her mind cataloged all the reasons to retreat. Professional boundaries, potential power imbalances, her own ambitions that left no room for distraction. Yet, when lightning flashed again, illuminating the naked longing in his eyes, rational thought receded. Her hand moved to the back of his neck, feeling the corded tension in his muscles as she drew his face down to hers. Their lips met with a shock of connection that surpassed mere physical attraction, a recognition of something both inevitable and dangerous. Justin's restraint lasted only moments before his arms encircled her, drawing her against the hard planes of his body. The kiss deepened, revealing a hunger that mirrored her own unexpected desire. Rain began to spatter against them as the wind shifted, but neither noticed the growing dampness of their clothes. His hands tangled in her hair as her fingers gripped the solid strength of his shoulders. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, the thin barrier of propriety between them irrevocably breached. "I should still go," Masai whispered against his mouth, even as her body contradicted her words, pressing closer. Justin's forehead rested against hers, his breathing uneven. "If that's what you want." His restraint, the knowledge that he would indeed stop if she asked, oddly intensified her desire. This was a man accustomed to taking what he wanted, yet he was offering her control. Before she could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind drove the rain sideways, soaking them both in an instant. Laughing despite the tension, they retreated inside, the darkness of the apartment now feeling like a cocoon rather than a constraint. In the dim glow of the emergency lights that had activated in the power outage, Justin looked at her with an expression that made her heart race. "Stay," he said simply. "Not for what you're thinking, but because the storm is dangerous." The double meaning hung between them as he handed her a towel from a nearby linen closet, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "I have guest rooms," he added, stepping back slightly, "and dry clothes you can borrow." The professional boundaries Masai had maintained so carefully were dissolving, yet strangely, she felt no panic at their loss. Instead, as she followed Justin deeper into the darkened apartment, she experienced a curious sense of stepping not into unknown territory, but into something that had been waiting for her all along. Chapter 3. Intoxicating Surrender. Paris in September held a particular magic, the scorching heat of summer giving way to crisp mornings and golden afternoons. From the window of Justin's suite at Le Meurice, Masai could see the Tuileries garden stretching toward the Seine, the geometric precision of its paths, a soothing order amid the chaos her life had become. 6 weeks had passed since the night of the storm, 6 weeks of pretending to herself that each encounter with Justin was a temporary indulgence she could contain and control. 6 weeks of failing spectacularly at that self-deception. The night of the power outage had ended with nothing more than a kiss, albeit one that had left her sleepless in his guest room. But the restraint Justin had shown that night had crumbled steadily in the days that followed, as had her own carefully constructed boundaries. Their first time together had been in his office after hours, the culmination of tension that had built during a meeting where they'd sat across from each other, discussing market strategies while exchanging glances that spoke of entirely different matters. Afterward, straightening her clothing with trembling hands, Masai had promised herself it was a momentary weakness, a physical release and nothing more. That fiction had become increasingly difficult to maintain as summer progressed. Against every resolution, she found herself responding to his late-night messages, accepting invitations to private dinners that inevitably ended in his bed, or hers. Professional discussions evolved into personal revelations, physical attraction deepening into something far more dangerous. Now, watching the sunset paint Paris in shades of amber and rose, she acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Justin Gatlin. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it settled in her chest with the weight of inevitability. Contemplating an escape, Justin's voice came from behind her as his arms encircled her waist, lips finding the sensitive spot below her ear. Masai leaned back against his chest, allowing herself the luxury of surrender. Only wondering how I ended up here when 3 months ago I swore I'd focus exclusively on business. And yet here you are, neglecting important networking opportunities to stand in a hotel room with me. His tone was teasing, but his hands moved with deliberate intent across her silk-covered abdomen. Terribly unprofessional, Ms. Mali. She turned in his arms, taking in the sight of him, dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed from her fingers earlier. The dichotomy between this private Justin and his public persona still fascinated her. "We have that dinner with Vogue in an hour," she reminded him, though her hands were already working on his remaining buttons. Plenty of time. His smile held equal parts tenderness and hunger as he backed her slowly toward the bed they'd barely left that morning. Later, as they dressed with the efficiency of those now accustomed to each other's presence, Masai caught Justin watching her with an expression that made her pause. "What?" she asked, smoothing the emerald gown he'd had delivered to her apartment before their departure. "I was just thinking that every powerful man in that room tonight will envy me," he said, adjusting his tie. "Not because of who I am, but because I'm with you." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. This was new territory. Compliments from Justin were typically direct and physical, not this soft-edged admiration. "Flattery before dinner, Mr. Gatlin," she deflected, uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through her chest at his words. "Observation, Miss Mali." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "You've become essential to me. I didn't expect that." The confession hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to articulate. Masai squeezed his hands once before releasing them, reaching for her clutch to signal a return to safer ground. "We should go," she said quietly. "We're keeping the fashion director of Vogue waiting." The dinner proved unexpectedly pivotal. Seated at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the Seine, Justin introduced Masai to the assembled fashion elite, not as his companion, but as the brilliant mind who will revolutionize ethical fashion. What followed was not the polite acknowledgement she'd anticipated, but genuine interest as the conversation centered on her vision rather than Justin's established empire. Your concept for integrating immigrant women's skills into luxury design is fascinating, Emmanuel, the fashion director, said midway through the meal. Particularly your emphasis on traditional textile techniques. Would you consider sharing your business plan? Vogue has been looking to highlight ventures that genuinely merge ethics with aesthetics. Masai, caught off guard by the serious interest, glanced at Justin. His encouraging nod held no possessiveness, no desire to control the narrative, only pride. As the evening progressed, a subtle disagreement emerged between them over implementation strategies. When Emmanuel suggested a gradual rollout of the immigrant ownership component, Justin immediately agreed, citing market readiness concerns. I think that underestimates consumer engagement with ethical brands, Masai countered firmly. The ownership structure is what differentiates us from conventional corporate social responsibility initiatives. Justin's expression flickered with momentary tension before he nodded. Masai makes a valid point. I tend to be overly cautious about financial projections. The brief exchange passed unnoticed by the others, but it registered with Masai as their first genuine professional disagreement. More significant was Justin's willingness to publicly yield to her perspective, something she suspected the ruthless businessman of his reputation would never have done. When they returned to their suite hours later, she was buoyed by the connection she'd made and the genuine interest in her concepts. You orchestrated that, she accused Justin, though without heat, as they entered their room. You set it up so they'd take me seriously. I merely provided the venue, he countered, removing his jacket. You did the rest. Did you see Emmanuel's face when you explained your manufacturing model? She was captivated. Because you position me as a peer, not as... She hesitated, unsure how to define what existed between them. Not as the woman I'm sleeping with, Justin finished bluntly. You are significantly more than that, Masai. The statement hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. What am I to you, then? She asked, the question emerging before she could reconsider its wisdom. Instead of answering directly, Justin crossed to the desk where his laptop sat. I was going to wait until we returned to New York for this, but perhaps now is better. He opened a file and turned the screen toward her. I've been reviewing your business plan. With a few adjustments to your capital structure and marketing approach, it's viable. Very viable. Masai moved to the screen, scanning the detailed analysis he'd performed, complete with potential investor contacts and market penetration projections. You're serious about this? I'm serious about you. Justin's hand came to rest at the small of her back, a familiar touch that still sent heat cascading through her body. Both professionally and personally, I want to fund this, Masai. Not as charity, but as an investment in a concept I believe in a woman I believe in. The dual nature of his declaration, acknowledging both her vision and the deepening connection between them, left her momentarily speechless. For months, she'd compartmentalized their relationship, keeping her professional ambitions separate from the intense physical connection they shared. Now, Justin was deliberately blurring those lines, offering a partnership that transcended simple categories. You still have concerns, though, she observed, recalling his reaction during dinner. About the ownership component for the women. Justin hesitated, and in that pause, Masai glimpsed something significant, an internal conflict he would once have concealed. I believe in your vision, he finally said. But yes, the profit-sharing aspect creates financial unknowns that make me uncomfortable. His admission, honest rather than placating, actually reassured her more than unconditional agreement would have. Thank you for being truthful, she said softly. We can work through the financial models together. This would change things between us, she added, turning to face him fully. Things are already changing. His voice had roughened, his hand moving to cup her face with a tenderness that belied his powerful frame. I'm falling in love with you, Masai Mali. I didn't plan to, didn't want to, but here we are. The confession, stark and unadorned, shattered the final barrier between them. When his lips found hers, the kiss held something beyond passion, a claiming, a recognition, a promise. Later, as moonlight spilled across their tangled bodies, Masai traced the contours of Justin's face with trembling fingers. I'm afraid, she admitted, the darkness making honesty easier. Not of you, but of this, of losing myself. I don't want you to lose yourself, he murmured, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. I want all of you, your brilliance, your vision, your fire. I've spent my life surrounded by people who want something from me. You're the first person who makes me want to give, instead. The vulnerability in his admission unlocked something within her. I love you, she whispered, the words both surrender and discovery. God help me, but I do. Their bodies came together again with renewed urgency, as though they could forge something permanent through the physical connection that had first drawn them together. Outside their window, Paris continued its ancient dance of lights upon the Seine, indifferent to the promises being exchanged in whispers and touches above its storied banks. In the afterglow, as Justin's breathing deepened into sleep, Masai remained awake, watching the play of shadows across his face. She had come to Paris for business connections, for the advancement of her professional vision. Instead, she found herself irrevocably bound to this complex man who had somehow become essential to both her personal and professional future. For the first time since arriving in New York with nothing but ambition and determination, Masai allowed herself to envision a path forward that included another person, not as an obstacle or distraction, but as a genuine partner. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. As dawn began to lighten the Parisian sky, she finally surrendered to sleep, her body curled against Justin's solid warmth, no longer certain where her dreams ended and their shared reality began. Chapter 4. Binding Promises. The Metropolitan Museum rooftop garden in October offered a dramatic backdrop for the charity gala, the skeletal branches of autumn trees silhouetted against Manhattan's glittering skyline, vintage string lights casting a golden glow over the assembled fashion and finance elite. Masai moved through the crowd with practiced ease, no longer the outsider but a recognized presence at these events, her hand occasionally brushing against Justin's in a gesture that appeared casual to observers, but sent ripples of awareness through them both. 3 weeks had passed since their return from Paris, 3 weeks of intensifying connection as their personal and professional lives became increasingly intertwined. Justin had introduced her to key investors in his network, arranged meetings with sustainable suppliers, and spent hours refining her business model. Yet, despite his enthusiastic support, Masai had begun noticing subtle hesitations when discussions turned to specific implementation timelines for the immigrant women's ownership stakes. We should consider piloting the profit-sharing component with a smaller group initially, he had suggested during a late-night strategy session in his penthouse. Test the model before full-scale implementation. That undermines the core principle, Masai had countered. Either we believe in equitable ownership or we don't. The disagreement had resolved with compromise, a phased implementation but with clear contractual guarantees. Yet, it left Masai with lingering concerns about Justin's fundamental comfort with her most revolutionary concepts. Tonight's event marked a significant milestone, a charity auction to benefit immigration support services, with Elegance Unlimited as the primary sponsor. When Justin had asked Masai to help organize it, she'd initially hesitated, wary of being perceived as merely his girlfriend rather than a business partner. But he'd insisted her expertise in immigrant community needs was essential, giving her equal billing on the planning committee. "You've transformed this event," observed Catherine Vega. The angel investor Masai had originally hoped to meet at the gala where she'd first encountered Justin. In previous years, it was just wealthy people feeling good about writing checks. Tonight, there's actual substance. "The substance was always there," Masai replied, watching as attendees engaged with the immigrant artisans she'd invited to demonstrate traditional textile techniques. It just needed proper framing. "And proper champions," Catherine added meaningfully, her gaze shifting to where Justin stood speaking with the mayor. "Gatlin's reputation has never included social consciousness. You've had quite an influence." Before Masai could respond, the lights dimmed slightly and Justin moved to the small stage area. The crowd quieted expectantly. When one of the world's most successful business moguls prepared to speak, people listened. "Thank you all for your generosity tonight," Justin began, his commanding presence drawing all eyes. "The funds raised will provide critical legal support and educational opportunities for immigrant families." Masai felt a surge of pride as he continued, outlining specific initiatives the money would support, programs she had helped identify based on her research and community connections. "But charity alone isn't enough," Justin continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone that caught Masai's attention. "Sustainable change requires systemic solutions, which is why I'm particularly excited about emerging business models that create structural opportunities rather than temporary assistance." His eyes found hers in the crowd, his expression softening briefly before he continued. "Tonight, I want to announce Elegance Unlimited's commitment to a new initiative developed by someone whose vision challenges our industry's status quo. Masai Mali has developed a business framework that integrates immigrant women's skills into luxury fashion production while providing them ownership stakes and career advancement paths." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as heads turned toward her. This wasn't part of the planned program. Justin had mentioned nothing about publicly endorsing her concept. "Our industry has long profited from the labor of immigrant women without offering them pathways to success," Justin continued. "Masai's model transforms that dynamic entirely, proving that ethics and profitability can coexist. Her vision represents the future of fashion, and I'm proud to say Elegance Unlimited will be partnering with her venture to bring it to reality." The applause that followed was genuine, but Masai barely registered it, focused instead on the intensity of Justin's gaze across the crowded room. This public declaration of faith in her concept, and by extension, in her, transcended their private assurances to each other. Yet even in this moment of triumph, a flicker of concern registered in her mind. Justin had described Elegance Unlimited partnering with her venture rather than funding it as an independent entity, as they had previously discussed. The distinction was subtle but potentially significant. For the remainder of the evening, Masai found herself the center of attention, fielding questions and exchanging contact information with potential investors and industry partners. Justin remained deliberately at a distance, allowing her the professional spotlight while watching with unmistakable pride. It was past midnight when they finally departed, the October air crisp as they stepped into the waiting car. "You might have warned me," Masai said once they were alone, though she couldn't summon any real annoyance. "And miss the genuine surprise on your face? Impossible." Justin's hand found hers in the darkness of the back seat. "Besides, I meant every word. Your concept is revolutionary, Masai. It deserves recognition." Is that what tonight was about? Professional recognition? That was part of it. Something in his tone made her turn to study his face, illuminated intermittently by passing streetlights. But there was more. Instead of elaborating, he instructed the driver to take them to his building, rather than dropping Masai at her apartment as originally planned. When she raised an eyebrow in question, he simply said, "There's something I want to show you." The car delivered them to Justin's building, where the doorman greeted them with a knowing smile that puzzled Masai. In the elevator ascending to the penthouse, Justin seemed uncharacteristically tense, his usual self-assurance replaced by a subtle energy she couldn't quite interpret. Rather than entering the apartment, Justin led her up a private staircase she'd never noticed before, emerging onto the building's rooftop. Masai gasped softly at the sight that greeted her. The entire space had been transformed into a private garden oasis, with potted trees strung with delicate lights, plush seating areas, and heating lamps warding off the autumn chill. At the center, a small table held a bottle of champagne in an ice bucket and a single white orchid. "When did you do this?" she asked, turning to find Justin watching her reaction intently. "It's been a work in progress for weeks." He guided her to the edge of the roof, where the Manhattan skyline spread before them like fallen stars. "I wanted a place that was just ours, away from both our professional worlds." The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on her, this deliberate creation of shared space, neither his territory nor hers, but something new belonging to them both. "Tonight wasn't just about your business concept," Justin continued, his voice taking on a quality she'd never heard before, a vulnerability beneath the confident exterior. "Though I meant every word about its importance and my commitment to it." He turned to face her fully, the city lights behind him, his expression unguarded in a way that made her heart race. "These past months with you have changed me, Masai. You've challenged me, inspired me, made me question priorities I've held for decades." His hands took hers, his thumbs brushing across her knuckles in a gesture both tender and nervous. "I've built my life around control and certainty. You make me want something different, something better." Masai felt the atmosphere shift between them, the air suddenly charged with possibility. "Justin, let me finish," he said gently, "before I lose my nerve." With deliberate movements, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small box of unmistakable significance. As he sank to one knee before her, Masai felt the world narrow to this moment, this man, this unexpected crossroads. "Masai Mali, I love you, your brilliance, your passion, your unflinching integrity. I want to build a life with you, support your vision, create something meaningful together." He opened the box to reveal a stunning black diamond set in platinum, its depths capturing and reflecting the city lights around them. "Will you marry me?" Time seemed suspended as Masai looked from the ring to the man offering it. This complex, powerful figure who had somehow become essential to her in ways she'd never anticipated. In his eyes, she saw not possession, but partnership, not control, but genuine respect. Yet even in this moment of overwhelming emotion, her practical nature asserted itself. "Your promise about my business, about supporting the initiative for immigrant women as an independent entity, that stands regardless." A flicker of hesitation crossed Justin's expression, so brief she might have imagined it, before he answered. "Your vision deserves to exist in the world, with or without us as a couple." The response, while beautiful, wasn't quite the unconditional affirmation she had sought. Still, the sincerity in his eyes and the unprecedented vulnerability he displayed in this moment overwhelmed her caution. "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. "Yes, I'll marry you." As he slid the ring onto her finger, its weight unfamiliar yet somehow right, Justin rose to draw her into an embrace that held equal parts tenderness and possession. His mouth found hers in a kiss that sealed their commitment, his body communicating what words could not fully express. Later, as they lay tangled in his bed, the city lights painting patterns across their skin, Masai studied the ring on her finger. The black diamond, unusual and distinctive, like the relationship it symbolized. "Why a black diamond?" she asked, her head resting on Justin's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. His fingers traced lazy patterns along her bare shoulder as he answered, "Because it's unique, resilient, formed under extraordinary pressure into something rare and valuable." His lips pressed against her forehead, "Like you, like us." In the quiet that followed, Masai contemplated the unexpected trajectory that had brought her to this moment. She had come to New York with singular focus, determined to build her business empire without distraction or compromise. Instead, she had found a partnership that enhanced rather than diminished her ambitions, a love that expanded rather than confined her vision. At least, she hoped that was what she had found. The slight hesitation in Justin's answer about her business independence lingered at the edges of her consciousness. A shadow too small to acknowledge, yet too persistent to completely ignore. But surely that was just her natural caution, her tendency to seek problems where none existed. As sleep claimed them both, her last coherent thought was that perhaps the most revolutionary act wasn't rejecting connection in pursuit of ambition, but finding the rare person who made both possible simultaneously. The morning would bring practical considerations, wedding plans, business strategies, and the inevitable complications of merging two strong identities. But for now, secure in Justin's embrace, Masai allowed herself the luxury of simple happiness, of futures reimagined and promises made beneath the watchful gaze of the city that had brought them together. Chapter 5. Ecstasy and Illusion. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, and a sixpence in your shoe. Masai's cousin Ayana finished securing the delicate sapphire hairpin, the something blue, into Masai's elaborate updo. There, now all superstitions are satisfied, and bad luck wouldn't dare touch this marriage. Masai studied her reflection in the full-length mirror of the bridal suite at the Waldorf Astoria. Her gown, a magnificent creation that Justin had commissioned from a Ghanaian-American designer, combined Western silhouette with traditional African detailing, ivory silk overlaid with intricate beadwork that told her family's history in patterns only those from her culture would recognize. "You look like royalty," Ayana whispered, stepping back to admire the full effect. Masai touched the beadwork at her waist, remembering the designer's passionate explanation of how each pattern represented different aspects of feminine power in various African traditions. It was exactly the type of cultural appreciation and elevation she hoped to bring to her own business, the business that would now have Justin's full backing and industry connections. The whirlwind of the past 3 months still left her breathless when she stopped to consider it. Their engagement had made headlines in both business and society pages, their unusual love story capturing public imagination. Justin had insisted on a rapid wedding timeline, eager to begin their life together officially, and Masai had agreed, seeing no reason to delay once the decision was made. Yet, amid the flurry of wedding preparations, she had begun noticing subtle but concerning patterns. Each time she attempted to schedule meetings with manufacturing partners for her business launch, Justin would suggest alternative contacts or timing adjustments. When she pressed for concrete dates to establish her company's legal structure, he would cite the wedding as requiring their full attention first. "We'll have plenty of time for business after the honeymoon," he had assured her when she raised the issue a week before the wedding. "I want you to enjoy this moment without distractions." His explanation was reasonable, his manner loving, yet something in his deflection had triggered a flicker of unease. For a man whose business decisions were typically executed with swift precision, this delay seemed uncharacteristic. "5 minutes, Ms. Mali," called the wedding coordinator from the doorway, interrupting her reflections. Ayana squeezed her hands once before departing to take her place with the other bridesmaids, leaving Masai alone for a final moment of contemplation before she walked toward her new life. She gazed at her reflection, acknowledging the faint anxiety beneath her bridal glow. Was she making a mistake? Committing herself to a man she had known less than a year, whose business approach fundamentally differed from her own in ways they had yet to fully reconcile? No, she decided firmly. Justin had demonstrated his commitment to her vision, even making a public declaration of support at the charity gala. Whatever differences existed in their approach, they shared core values and a genuine love that transcended professional considerations. The rest they would navigate together, as partners. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion and sensory impressions, the hushed awe of 400 guests as she entered the ballroom on her father's arm. The string quartet's delicate rendition of a composition Justin had commissioned specifically for this moment, the dignified tears in her mother's eyes, and most of all, Justin's expression as she approached, a look of such naked adoration that it momentarily halted her breath. Their vows, written by each for the other, spoke of partnership, mutual respect, and shared vision alongside the more traditional promises of love and fidelity. When Justin slipped the wedding band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady but his voice trembled slightly, a vulnerability he showed only to her. "I give you this ring as a symbol of my commitment to our shared journey," he said, the words carrying across the hushed room. "My strength is yours, my resource is yours, my vision expanded through yours. What I build, we build together." The reception that followed transformed the Waldorf's grand ballroom into a spectacular fusion of African and American design elements, with tables named after cities significant to their individual and shared journeys. Fashion industry titans mingled with finance moguls, celebrities with academics, creating precisely the cross-pollination of worlds that characterized their relationship. During the dinner, Justin rose to make an unexpected announcement, his hand warm against the small of Masai's back as they stood together. "Today marks not only our personal union but a professional commitment as well," he told the assembled guests. Elegance Unlimited is establishing the Mali Foundation with an initial endowment of $10 million, dedicated to educational and entrepreneurial opportunities for immigrant women in fashion. Gasps and applause rippled through the room as Masai turned to him in genuine surprise. They had discussed establishing such a foundation eventually, but not with such an immediate and substantial commitment. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered as guests clinked their glasses in approval. "Because I wanted to see that look on your face," he murmured back, his lips brushing her ear. "The foundation is yours to direct, entirely separate from our business ventures, something that's purely your vision." The gesture struck her deeply, not just the generosity but the clear statement it made about respecting her autonomy even as they joined their lives. In that moment, any lingering doubts about the wisdom of their rapid courtship and marriage dissolved completely. Yet, later that evening, as she overheard a fragment of conversation between Justin and Lawrence Whitfield, the chairman of Elegance Unlimited's board, her unease resurfaced. "The foundation was a masterstroke," Whitfield murmured, unaware of Masai's presence just behind a decorative pillar. "Excellent PR and a perfect way to channel her inclinations without disrupting core operations." "It's not about PR, Lawrence," Justin replied, his tone cooler than Masai had ever heard him address a colleague. "It's about supporting meaningful initiatives." Of course," Whitfield backpedaled smoothly. "I only meant the board will be relieved that the more experimental elements will be contained within the foundation rather than impacting shareholder returns." Masai slipped away before either man noticed her, the exchange leaving a sour taste that she deliberately pushed aside. She was reading too much into an innocuous comment from a board member who clearly didn't share Justin's evolved perspective on ethical business practices. It hardly reflected her husband's intentions. Hours later, as their private jet climbed into the night sky bound for the Maldives, Masai found herself studying her husband's profile in the dim cabin lighting. The formal attire of the wedding had been replaced by casual luxury, but Justin carried the same commanding presence in linen as he did in bespoke suits. Having second thoughts, he asked without turning, somehow sensing her scrutiny. Quite the opposite. She moved from her seat to join him on the small sofa, curling against his side as his arm automatically encircled her. I was thinking that for someone who prided herself on careful planning and strategic decision-making, I've been remarkably impulsive about the most significant partnership of my life. And yet it feels entirely right. Justin's hand traced the curve of her shoulder, his touch igniting the familiar heat that never seemed to diminish between them. Sometimes the most successful ventures are the ones that defy conventional business planning. Is that what I am? A successful venture? Her tone was teasing, but a genuine question lay beneath. His response was to draw her into a kiss that quickly intensified, his hands remembering precisely how to unravel her composure. You are the only merger I've ever pursued where the acquisition was mutual, he murmured against her throat, and definitely the most satisfying. What followed transformed the private cabin into an extension of their wedding night, their bodies celebrating the official union that their hearts had recognized months earlier. The Maldivian island that served as their honeymoon destination exceeded even Masai's imagination. A private sanctuary of white sand and turquoise water, staffed discreetly to anticipate their needs while maintaining perfect privacy. Their overwater bungalow featured a glass floor section where they could observe marine life directly beneath them, creating the dreamlike sensation of floating above another world. Days blended into each other in a rhythm of passionate discovery and peaceful companionship. They snorkeled through coral gardens, dined on the beach beneath the stars, and spent long hours simply talking about childhoods, failures, dreams, fears, conversations that somehow never exhausted themselves despite their months together. In the evenings, often with the sunset painting the horizon in impossible colors, they would return to business discussions, sketching concepts on the terrace, or debating market strategies as the stars emerged above them. It was during one such session, 2 weeks into their stay, that Masai raised the topic of implementation timelines for her company's launch. I'd like to have the legal structure established by our return, she said, tablet in hand as she made notes, with manufacturing partnerships secured by the following month. That gives us a reasonable runway for a spring collection debut. Justin's expression shifted subtly, a momentary tightening around his eyes before he nodded. We should integrate the Foundation's educational programs with the production facilities, he suggested, redirecting slightly. Create direct pathways from training to employment. Absolutely, Masai agreed, noting the deflection but choosing not to press in this perfect setting. But first, we need the core business established as its own entity, separate from both the Foundation and Elegance Unlimited. As we discussed, the mentorship component is crucial, Justin continued, seemingly not registering her point. We want to avoid the charity model entirely. This is about creating genuine opportunity infrastructure. Exactly. She glanced up to find him watching her with that particular intensity that still made her pulse quicken. What? Just appreciating the view, he replied, though his eyes hadn't left her face. My brilliant wife, revolutionizing an industry from a beach lounger. Your brilliant wife who's currently being distracted from important planning, she pointed out, though she made no objection when he took the tablet from her hands and set it aside. Strategic planning requires regular breaks, he countered, drawing her against him as the last light faded from the sky. For optimal cognitive function. Their laughter dissolved into sighs as professional boundaries once again gave way to personal connection, the ocean whispering beneath them and stars witnessing from above. On their final evening in paradise, as they lay tangled in sheets, watching moonlight create patterns across the water, Justin propped himself on one elbow to study her face. "Happy?" he asked simply. Masai considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Yes," she finally answered. "In ways I never expected to be. This doesn't feel like a compromise or a distraction from my goals. It feels like an amplification." His smile held relief alongside satisfaction. "That's what I wanted, not to diminish you in any way, but to create something greater than either of us could build alone." As their mouths met in a kiss that quickly rekindled into passionate exploration, Masai surrendered completely to the certainty that had been growing since that first night in his penthouse during the storm. This marriage, this partnership, this shared vision, it wasn't the detour from her ambitions she had once feared, but the path to their fullest realization. Later, as Justin slept beside her, arm possessively draped across her waist, even in unconsciousness, Masai gazed through the glass floor at the nocturnal sea life illuminated by subtle lighting beneath their bungalow. The fish moved in coordinated patterns, separate creatures functioning as a unified whole. It struck her as an apt metaphor for the life she and Justin were creating. Distinct identities merged into something harmonious and stronger. With his influence and resources behind her vision, the business empire she had dreamed of building no longer seemed a distant aspiration, but an imminent reality. As sleep finally claimed her, Masai's last conscious thought was that the universe had delivered something far more valuable than what she had originally sought. She had come to New York seeking investors for her business. Instead, she had found a true partner for both her professional journey and her heart. What she couldn't yet see was how quickly that belief would be tested and how painfully it might prove to be an illusion. Chapter 6. Devastating Betrayal. The first fractures appeared so subtly that Masai initially dismissed them as imagination. 6 months into their marriage, life had settled into a rhythm of domestic and professional integration that seemed to validate all her hopes. They maintained apartments in both their names, her modest Brooklyn space for late work nights, his Manhattan penthouse as their primary residence, though they rarely spent nights apart. Mornings began with shared coffee and business news review, transitioning into separate professional schedules that often reconverged for strategic meetings or industry events. Evenings brought them back together, sometimes working side by side into the night, their collaborative energy seemingly inexhaustible. Their physical connection remained intense, discovering new dimensions of desire rather than falling into predictable patterns. Yet something had shifted in recent weeks, a subtle cooling in Justin's response when she discussed her business implementation timeline. Where once he had matched her enthusiasm with strategic suggestions, now his reactions seemed measured, his engagement perfunctory. Twice he had rescheduled meetings with potential manufacturers, citing scheduling conflicts, and the promised paperwork establishing her company's funding. Structure remained mysteriously delayed. "It's just the Bergdorf expansion," Ayana reassured her over lunch, referencing Elegance Unlimited's major new venture. "He's juggling 100 details right now. The timing isn't perfect for launching your project simultaneously." Masai nodded, wanting to believe the explanation. It made logical sense. Justin was indeed absorbed with a significant expansion of his retail footprint. Yet something in her gut remained uneasy, a dissonance between his continued personal attentiveness and his professional distance from her vision. That evening, she arrived at the penthouse earlier than usual, intending to prepare dinner herself rather than relying on their usual delivery or staff-prepared meals. Creating something tangible with her hands might settle the nebulous anxiety that had been growing within her. She was chopping vegetables when her phone pinged with a calendar notification, a meeting between Justin and Catherine Vega, the angel investor who had shown early interest in Masai's concept. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning at Justin's office. a meeting he hadn't mentioned. Frowning, Masai checked the notification details. It had been inadvertently shared with her through their synchronized calendars, with a note clearly not intended for her eyes. Mali Concept Acquisition Structure. The knife paused mid-chop as she stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the phrase. Acquisition structure implied something entirely different from the partnership they had discussed, something that sounded disturbingly like Justin planning to absorb her concept into Elegance Unlimited, rather than establishing it as the independent venture he had promised. When Justin arrived home an hour later, she had abandoned dinner preparations entirely, the half-chopped vegetables abandoned on the cutting board as she sat at the kitchen island, phone before her. "You're home early," he observed, loosening his tie as he crossed to kiss her. When she turned her face slightly, offering her cheek instead of her lips, he paused. "What's wrong?" "You tell me." She slid her phone toward him, the calendar notification displayed on screen. "What exactly is a Mali Concept Acquisition Structure?" Justin's expression shifted minutely, a tightening around the eyes, a momentary tension in his jaw before his features smoothed into neutral professionalism. It was a transformation she had witnessed before, but never directed at her. This was Justin Gatlin, the CEO, not Justin, her husband. "That's an internal terminology issue," he said, his tone measured as he set down his briefcase. "The legal team uses acquisition for any new business integration, including partnerships. I should have clarified that with them." The explanation was smooth, reasonable, and utterly unconvincing. 6 months of marriage had attuned Masai to Justin's tells, the subtle indicators when he shifted from honesty to strategic communication. "Why are you meeting with Catherine Vega about my business without me?" she pressed, keeping her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "It's a preliminary discussion about funding structures. I was going to brief you afterward, once we had concrete options to consider." Again, plausible but incomplete. The Justin who had proposed to her on the rooftop garden would have included her in such discussions from the outset, would have respected her ownership of the concept enough to make her presence non-negotiable. "I'd like to attend," she said simply. Something flickered in his expression. Annoyance? Calculation? "The timing is complicated. We'd need to reschedule to accommodate—" "No," Masai interrupted, her patience fraying. "The timing is fine. I'll clear my morning. This is my business concept, Justin, my vision. I should be in any meeting discussing its future." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably between them, filled with unspoken tensions. When Justin finally responded, his voice had taken on the cool, analytical tone she had heard him use in difficult negotiations. "Perhaps we should discuss the project's status more broadly," he said, moving to pour himself a drink from the bar cart, something he rarely did immediately after arriving home. "The market conditions have shifted since our initial discussions." "What does that mean, exactly?" Masai felt a chill settle over her that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Justin swirled the amber liquid in his glass before answering. "It means the original structure we discussed may not be optimal given current realities. The standalone venture model carries significantly more risk than integrating key elements of your concept into Elegance Unlimited's existing frameworks." "Integration," Masai repeated, the word tasting bitter. "You mean absorption. You're talking about folding my concept into your company rather than establishing it independently, as you promised." "I'm talking about pragmatic adaptation to market realities." His tone remained measured, reasonable, the voice he used to persuade resistant board members. "The ethical manufacturing principles you've developed are revolutionary, Masai. They would transform Elegance Unlimited's production model entirely. But the mentorship and ownership components for immigrant women are financially experimental at best, liability risks at worst." Each word struck like a physical blow. This wasn't a minor adjustment, but a fundamental dismantling of her vision's core purpose. Those components aren't accessory features, Justin. They're the entire point. Masai stood, needing to physically match his height as they spoke. Without them, it's just corporate social responsibility window dressing, not systemic change. Systemic change is a noble goal, he conceded, taking a careful sip of his drink. But business sustainability comes first. The board won't approve. The board. The pieces suddenly aligned with sickening clarity. This isn't about market conditions at all. This is about your board of directors balking at genuine profit sharing with immigrant women. It's about control. Justin's silence was confirmation enough. "When did you know?" she asked, her voice dropping dangerously. "When did you realize you wouldn't support my vision as originally conceived? Before or after you proposed?" His hesitation was brief but damning. The full financial projections weren't completed until after the wedding. The numbers for an independent venture simply don't lie to me. The words escaped low and fierce. "You've been in this industry for 15 years. You knew exactly what the numbers would look like before you ever promised to fund my concept. You knew and you promised anyway." Justin set down his glass with deliberate control. "I promised to help bring your vision to reality, and I'm doing exactly that. The form may differ from your original conception, but the impact will be entirely different." Masai felt something fracturing inside her chest, not just anger, but a profound disillusionment. "You're offering me a diluted version that preserves your control while claiming it's for my benefit. That's not partnership, that's patronage." "It's business," Justin countered, his own composure finally slipping. "This isn't a charity, Masai. I'm running a publicly traded company with obligations to shareholders. Your original model would never generate the returns they expect." The statement hung between them, brutal in its naked truth. This was the reality behind the romantic promises and passionate declarations. Cold calculation dressed as pragmatic wisdom. "So that's it," Masai said quietly. "When forced to choose between your promise to me and your promise to your shareholders, there's no real contest." "That's an oversimplification. Is it?" She moved closer, searching his face for the man she thought she had married. "Tell me this then. If I refuse to accept this integration, if I insist on establishing an independent venture as you originally promised, will you support that?" The answer was written in his eyes before he spoke. "Not with elegance, unlimited resources. The risk profile doesn't justify." "Stop." Masai raised a hand, unable to bear the corporate doublespeak from the same lips that had whispered love against her skin just hours earlier. "At least have the decency to be honest now. You never intended to follow through as promised. You told me what I needed to hear to say yes, to the business partnership, to the marriage, to all of it." "That's not true." For the first time, genuine emotion cracked through Justin's professional veneer. "My feelings for you are real, Masai. Our marriage is separate from business decisions." "Is it?" She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "We built our relationship on mutual respect for each other's vision. You praised my concept publicly, promised to fund it privately, used it to enhance your own reputation as a forward-thinking CEO. What happens to our marriage when you remove that foundation?" The question hung unanswered as they stared at each other across the kitchen island, the same space where they had shared countless meals, reviewed business plans, made love on impulsive nights when desire wouldn't wait for the bedroom. The intimacy of the setting now felt like mockery. "The meeting with Vega is cancelled," Justin finally said, his voice quieter. "We'll discuss this between ourselves first and determine next steps." "There's nothing to discuss." Masai gathered her phone and keys with trembling hands. "You've made your position clear. I need time to consider mine. As she moved toward the door, Justin stepped into her path, not touching her, but blocking her exit. Where are you going? To my apartment. The fact that she still maintained her Brooklyn space, a decision Justin had occasionally questioned, now seemed prescient rather than unnecessary. Masai, don't leave like this. We can work through. Can we? She looked up at him, this man who had claimed to love all aspects of her, her intelligence, her passion, her vision, only to discard the parts that proved inconvenient to his corporate interests. I'm not sure what's left to work through when fundamental promises are negotiable. Something hardened in Justin's expression, pride or resolve, she couldn't determine which. If you walk out now, you're making a statement about our marriage, not just business. The implicit ultimatum hung between them, revealing more about his character than perhaps he intended. This was the man behind the careful charm and passionate attentiveness, someone accustomed to compliance, unprepared for genuine challenge from a woman he had perhaps unconsciously expected to eventually yield to his greater experience and authority. No, Justin, Masai said quietly. You made that statement when you decided your word to me was conditional. I'm just acknowledging it. When she stepped around him toward the door, he didn't attempt to stop her again. The last thing she saw before the elevator doors closed was Justin standing in the penthouse doorway, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something that might have been regret, though whether for his actions or simply for being called to account for them, Masai could no longer determine. As the elevator descended from the penthouse that had been her home, Masai felt a corresponding plunge within her chest, the devastating free fall of realizing that the partnership she had believed in had been, at least in part, an illusion crafted from her own hopes and Justin's calculated promises. Chapter 7: Severed Bonds. The guest bedroom in Justin and Masai's penthouse became her territory in the weeks that followed their confrontation. What had once been a space for occasional visitors transformed into a sanctuary where she retreated each night, away from the man who had betrayed her trust. The king-sized bed felt vast and empty as she slept alone, curled on one side as though her body still expected Justin's presence. During daylight hours, they maintained careful distance. Conversations were limited to logistical necessities, their voices professionally neutral as though addressing business associates rather than spouses. At industry events, they presented a united front, Justin's hand resting at the small of her back in a gesture that once sparked desire but now felt like an artificial performance for watching eyes. Masai found herself studying her husband when he wasn't aware, searching for glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with beneath the corporate mask that now seemed permanently affixed. Occasionally, she would catch Justin watching her with an expression of confused longing, as though equally unable to reconcile the passionate connection they'd shared with the glacial distance between them now. We need to discuss the integration of your concept into the spring collection, Justin said one evening, entering her room without knocking. His tie was loosened, a glass of scotch in hand. His third that night, judging by the slight relaxation of his precisely controlled demeanor. There's nothing to discuss, Masai replied, not looking up from her laptop. I'm not authorizing the use of my designs or methodologies within Elegance Unlimited's framework. The concept remains independent as originally agreed. This stubbornness isn't good business, he countered, leaning against the doorframe. The board meeting is Thursday. They're expecting a full presentation on the integration. Then they'll be disappointed. Masai finally met his gaze, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. You made promises, Justin. Not just as my husband, but as a business partner. Those promises don't become optional because they're inconvenient to your shareholders. Something flashed in his eyes. Frustration mingled with an emotion that might have been shame before it was quickly suppressed. The business landscape changed. Adaptation is necessary for survival. Save the corporate platitudes for your board. Masai closed her laptop with deliberate control. They might still believe the carefully crafted image of Justin Gatlin, visionary CEO. I know better now. As the weeks passed, Masai realized with increasing clarity that reconciliation was impossible. The foundation of their marriage, mutual respect for each other's vision, had been irrevocably damaged. More painful than Justin's failure to support her business was the recognition that he had never fully seen her as an equal partner, merely a valuable acquisition in his empire building. The final blow came when she discovered through a carelessly forwarded email that Justin had been leveraging her community connections to enhance Elegance Unlimited's image while systematically dismantling her plans behind the scenes. The immigrant women she had promised opportunities were being used as marketing props, with no intention of delivering the ownership stakes or career advancement paths she had envisioned. That night, she placed divorce papers on his desk, her wedding ring beside them. The black diamond caught the light as she set it down, dark depths momentarily flashing with the same promise that had once seemed so genuine. Justin found her in their bedroom, not the guest room but the master suite she had avoided for weeks, packing a suitcase with methodical efficiency. "You can't be serious," he said from the doorway, the papers crumpled in his fist. His voice carried none of the tenderness that had once made her weak at the knees. "I've never been more serious," she replied, not meeting his eyes as she folded a blouse he had once removed with reverent hands. "You didn't marry me, Justin. You acquired me. Another asset to enhance your corporate portfolio." "That's not fair," he countered, crossing to grasp her arm, forcing her to face him. "Whatever our professional disagreements, what we have personally is real. You know that." Masai looked into the eyes of the man she had loved with such abandon, searching for the genuine connection that had once seemed unbreakable. Instead, she saw only the calculated determination of a man unaccustomed to losing any woman, any deal, any power struggle. "What we had was real," she corrected gently, removing her arm from his grasp. "But you killed it the moment you decided your word to me was negotiable." The divorce proceedings revealed a side of Justin she had glimpsed but never fully acknowledged. Coldly strategic, accustomed to winning at any cost. His legal team attacked with surgical precision, attempting to claim her business concept as company intellectual property since it had been developed during their marriage with company resources. "They're playing hardball," Masai's attorney warned during a strategy session. "Gatlin rarely loses, and he's dedicating significant resources to this case. We might need to consider settlement options that preserve some aspects of your concept while conceding others." "No concessions," Masai replied, the steel in her voice surprising even herself. "I'll walk away with nothing financially if I have to, but my vision remains intact and wholly mine." The battle dragged through summer into fall, each legal maneuver stripping away another layer of the love she had believed in, leaving only bitter recognition of her own naivete. The man who had once worshipped her body now deployed teams of lawyers to possess her mind as well, claiming ownership of ideas she had nurtured long before meeting him. Their final confrontation came not in court, but in a mediation session at his attorney's offices. Across a polished conference table, Justin watched her with unreadable eyes as their respective legal teams outlined a potential settlement. "Ms. Molly retains intellectual property rights to her business concept," his attorney summarized reluctantly, "in exchange for a significantly reduced financial settlement and a non-compete clause restricting implementation for 18 months. "The non-compete is unacceptable," Masai's attorney began, but she raised a hand to silence him. "I'll agree to the terms," she said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "The concept is worth more than money, and 18 months is nothing in building something that will last." Justin's eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication of surprise at her acceptance. For the first time in months, he addressed her directly rather than through attorneys. "You're certain?" His voice carried none of the triumph she had expected, instead sounding oddly hollow. "Completely." Masai met his gaze without flinching. "Unlike some, I place integrity above immediate gratification." Something flickered in his expression, a brief glimpse of the man she had loved before. The corporate mask reasserted itself. He nodded once and gestured for his attorney to proceed with the paperwork. In the final hearing, as she signed the papers that ended their 15-month marriage, Masai caught Justin watching her across the conference table. For a moment, something raw and unguarded flashed in his eyes. Desire mingled with resentment, possession with loss. Their gazes held, communicating what words had failed to express. The tragedy of two people who still hungered for each other while finding the terms of connection impossible to reconcile. Then it vanished behind the impenetrable mask of the businessman who had ultimately chosen corporate interests over love. His signature on the final page was bold and decisive, the same confidence with which he had once written love notes on her skin. Masai walked out of the courthouse with her business plans intact, but only a modest settlement, her lawyer having sacrificed financial claims to protect her intellectual property. Spring sunshine bathed the Manhattan streets in a warm glow that seemed to mock the winter still gripping her heart. As she descended the courthouse steps alone, she caught a glimpse of Justin watching from a tinted car window, his expression unreadable behind dark glass. In that moment, she made a silent vow that would shape her next 2 years. Never again would she surrender her power or her body to a man who couldn't recognize her worth beyond the bedroom. The Justin Gatlin who had captured her heart no longer existed, if he ever had at all. Chapter 8. Phoenix Rising. 2 years passed in a determined blur after Masai's divorce from Justin. Using her modest settlement and the business concept she'd fought to keep, she launched Empower Her from a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. The company employed immigrant women in ethical fashion production while providing business training and fair wages. The space combined industrial elements with warmth. Exposed brick walls adorned with textiles from the women's countries of origin. The 18-month non-compete clause from her divorce settlement forced her to initially focus on accessories and home goods rather than apparel. Though frustrating, this restriction allowed her to build manufacturing expertise in less competitive segments before expanding into clothing when the restriction expired. Masai's small team worked miracles with limited resources. She often slept on the office sofa, too exhausted to return to her sparsely furnished Brooklyn apartment. Her personal life remained deliberately barren, the occasional dates arranged by friends never progressing beyond polite dinners. More troubling was her body's stubborn refusal to respond to touches that weren't Justin's. At night, she sometimes still dreamed of him, waking with a visceral ache she refused to acknowledge. The practical challenges of building a business with minimal capital taught Masai resilience she hadn't known she possessed. When their first manufacturing run showed quality control issues, she spent 3 days personally inspecting each piece. When a supplier suddenly doubled prices, she sourced alternatives through immigrant community connections. When retail outlets balked at their higher price points, she developed compelling ethical marketing materials that justified the premium. The problem isn't that ethical production costs more, she explained to a skeptical buyer. It's that conventional production externalizes costs through exploitation. We're simply accounting honestly for the true value of human labor. Her unwavering commitment to these principles gradually attracted like-minded partners. A small collective of sustainable retailers agreed to feature their accessories. Fashion bloggers specializing in ethical consumption highlighted their story. Slowly, Empower Her built a reputation for exceptional quality and authentic values, rather than mere marketing claims. When Bergdorf Goodman expressed interest in their fall collection, Masai permitted herself the first genuine hope since her divorce. The buyer examined their samples with critical precision before nodding. "The craftsmanship is exceptional," she said, "and the story behind the brand will resonate with our clientele. We'd like to feature a capsule collection for fall." The breakthrough Masai had fought for seemed finally within reach when a women's investment collective provided capital for expansion. She hired additional staff, increased production, and began talks with other retailers. The immigrant women working with her blossomed under her mentorship, their confidence growing alongside their skills. Lena, a Syrian refugee with exquisite embroidery skills, had progressed from production to design in just 8 months. Watching her present concepts for the spring collection, Masai felt true fulfillment for the first time since her divorce. The pain of Justin's betrayal had dulled to a manageable ache. She had built something meaningful entirely on her own terms, validating her vision without his resources or connections. Then disaster struck without warning. Marcus Reed, her trusted financial manager and business partner, disappeared overnight, along with nearly all their operating capital. He left behind crushing debt, unfulfillable production orders, and a trail of financial manipulation that had gone undetected for months. He transferred everything to offshore accounts, her accountant explained, spreading bank statements across her desk. The business line of credit is maxed out, supplier payments are overdue, and the next payroll will bounce if we process it. The method of the sabotage seemed almost calculated in its precision, striking just as they secured their breakthrough with Bergdorf, targeting their cash flow at the exact moment when production costs were highest and before revenue would begin flowing. It wasn't just financial theft, but a strategically timed attack designed to ensure maximum damage to the company's reputation and viability. "We have 2 weeks before we default on the factory lease," her assistant informed her grimly. "The women are asking if they should look for other jobs." The thought of facing Lena and the others, women who had fled persecution only to find another form of betrayal, filled Masai with dread and determination in equal measure. These women had trusted her vision and leadership. She refused to become another person who failed them. That night, alone in her apartment, Masai allowed herself precisely 1 hour of desperate tears before pulling herself together. She permitted the grief and rage to flow unchecked for exactly 60 minutes, curled on her bathroom floor. Then, with deliberate control, she washed her face, changed into fresh clothes, and began methodically listing potential solutions. Conventional bank loans were impossible with their now toxic financial status. Her personal savings would cover perhaps 2 weeks of operations. Former classmates who might have helped were already investors in the initial round, their resources committed. By dawn, Masai had exhausted every legitimate funding option she could think of. Yet surrender remained unthinkable, not just for her sake, but for the women who had trusted her leadership and invested their hopes in this venture. Their faces haunted her thoughts. Lena's proud smile when showing her first completed design, Fatima's tears when receiving her first profit-sharing payment, Amina's quiet determination as she mastered financial literacy courses. The irony wasn't lost on her that the man who had once promised to make her business dreams reality might have easily resolved this crisis with a single phone call. Yet even in her desperation, Masai knew she would rather watch her company crumble than crawl back to Justin seeking rescue. Some prices were simply too high to pay, a lesson her ex-husband had taught her all too well. As she stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, eyes reddened but resolute, her phone vibrated with a message from Zara, a friend who worked in luxury client services. "I may have a solution to your funding problem. Dinner tonight, 7 p.m. at Lola's." Masai hesitated only briefly before replying. With time running out and her employees' livelihoods hanging in the balance, she could no longer afford the luxury of pride or conventional boundaries. Whatever Zara's solution might be, she owed it to her team to at least hear it out. The decision she would make that evening would set in motion events that would force her to confront not just her financial crisis, but the unresolved feelings she had spent 2 years denying. I'm being asked to rewrite chapters 9 through 12 of the romance novel, with a 20 to 30% increase in length compared to my most recent condensed version, but not as long as the original versions I created. I'll aim to hit that sweet spot, adding more emotional development, character growth, and scene details while keeping the narrative focused and efficient. The user has also activated a business writing style, but given that this is creative fiction writing, a romance novel, I'll need to adapt this appropriately. I'll keep the prose clear and well-structured, but will need to include emotional elements, descriptive language, and dialogue that romance novels require. I'll avoid overly casual language or slang, but will maintain the intimate tone necessary for romance. For each chapter, I'll 1. Add more specific emotional responses and internal thoughts. 2. Develop the scenes with slightly more descriptive detail. 3. Expand dialogue where it adds to character development. 4. Ensure Justin's transformation is shown through actions, not just stated. 5. Keep the plot points intact while enriching the emotional journey. I'll start with Chapter 9 and work through to Chapter 12, maintaining continuity while expanding each by approximately 20 to 30%. Chapter 9. Desperate measures. It's not conventional, but it's legitimate, Zara explained over drinks at a quiet corner table. Her exclusive matchmaking service connected wealthy businessmen with accomplished women. Our clients value substantive conversation and industry connections. Many are looking for companions who understand their business worlds. Masai studied her untouched wine, watching the burgundy liquid catch the light. You're talking about high-end escorting. I'm talking about networking with benefits, Zara corrected, leaning forward. These men seek intelligent company first, though physical attraction certainly plays a role. The financial arrangement is quite generous, $5,000 for a single evening, regardless of outcome. The amount would cover their most urgent supplier payment, buying precious time. Masai felt the weight of her employees' futures pressing against her principles. I've built Empower Her on the premise that women shouldn't have to leverage their bodies for economic opportunity, she said after a long pause. And yet, you're considering exactly that calculus for yourself, Zara observed without judgment. The difference is choice. You have options most of your employees never did. After 3 sleepless nights weighing her options against the faces of women who depended on her business, Masai reluctantly agreed to one meeting. Just dinner, she insisted, signing the service's discretion agreement. Nothing more. The following evening, she arrived at the presidential suite of the Four Seasons, heart pounding with conflicted emotions. Her black dress, understated yet undeniably elegant, felt like armor and surrender simultaneously. When she knocked, seconds stretched into eternity before the door opened. Time stopped. Standing before her was Justin Gatlin, his expression transforming from polite expectation to shock. Masai. Her name escaped him like a prayer and curse combined. What is this? She managed, fury masking the humiliation coursing through her. Some elaborate scheme to humiliate me further. I had no idea, Justin said, composure visibly shaken. The service said they were sending an accomplished fashion entrepreneur. They never mentioned names. The coincidence seemed mathematically impossible, yet the genuine surprise in his eyes suggested truth. For a moment, they remained frozen in the doorway, the air between them charged with 2 years of unresolved history. I should go, Masai said, turning away. Wait. Justin's voice lacked its usual commanding tone, instead sounding almost vulnerable. Please, at least come in so we can talk privately, not in a hotel hallway. Against her better judgment, she entered the suite, maintaining careful distance. The space was elegant and impersonal, yet instantly filled with the dangerous electricity that had always existed between them. "Why are you using a matchmaking service?" she asked, remaining standing as he closed the door. "Surely the great Justin Gatlin doesn't need to pay for female company." "I'm not looking for random female company," he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "I've been trying to reach you for months. You've blocked my calls, refused meeting requests, instructed your staff to deny my visits." "With good reason," she countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know about Marcus Reed," Justin said quietly. "I know what he did to your company." The statement hit her like a physical blow. "How?" "Because I've been watching your progress since the day you walked out," he admitted, maintaining a respectful distance. "Not to interfere, just to know you were succeeding. When I heard about Reed's disappearance, I had my security team investigate. My business troubles aren't your concern," Masai said, though something in his tone made her pulse quicken for reasons beyond anger. "What if they are?" Justin moved toward the dining table, gesturing for her to join him. "What if I told you Reed was hired by my main competitor to sabotage you?" "I wouldn't believe you," she said automatically, though doubt had begun to creep in. Justin slid a tablet toward her, displaying bank transfers connecting Marcus to Westfield Apparel. "They targeted you specifically to get to me. They knew I still cared about you despite everything." The evidence was compelling. Methodical documentation of payments, encrypted messages, surveillance photos of Marcus meeting with Westfield's CFO. The precision of the investigation spoke to resources far beyond what Masai could have accessed. Outside, thunder rumbled unexpectedly, an eerie echo of the storm that had first pushed them together. "This doesn't change what happened between us," Masai said, her resolve weakening under his steady gaze. "No," Justin agreed, his voice softening. "But perhaps it's time we both heard the complete truth." As lightning flashed outside, illuminating his features in stark relief, Masai realized she stood at another crossroads with this man who had once been her everything. This time, she entered the conversation with eyes wide open, the illusions of their first encounter long since shattered by hard-earned wisdom. Chapter 10: Confrontations and Revelations. The elaborately prepared dinner sat untouched as they faced each other across the table. For hours, they navigated a conversation more honest than any during their marriage, anger and resentment gradually giving way to reluctant understanding. "My father died when I was 16, Justin revealed, his voice holding a vulnerability she'd rarely heard. "He was brilliant, a talented painter, but terrible with money. No health insurance, no savings, nothing to protect his family when cancer struck." "Your mother raised you alone," Masai said, recalling fragments he'd shared during their marriage. "She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Me and my 2 younger siblings," he continued, fingers tightening around his glass. "Night shifts, cleaning offices, days as a receptionist, weekends at a grocery store. By 45, her heart gave out from the strain." Understanding bloomed in Masai, his reputation for ruthless efficiency, his focus on profit margins, his careful control suddenly made sense not as mere ambition, but as deep-seated protection. "So when my business model presented uncertain returns," she began. "I panicked," he admitted, meeting her eyes directly. "The board's concerns confirmed my fears. Rather than supporting your vision and finding creative solutions, I reverted to control, the strategy that had kept me safe my entire life." "It doesn't excuse what you did," she said quietly. "No," Justin acknowledged. "I've spent 2 years confronting the man I became, someone who would sacrifice anything, even love, for financial certainty." Lightning illuminated his features, revealing an expression Masai had rarely seen during their marriage. genuine vulnerability rather than calculated charm. "Why tell me this now?" she asked, struggling to maintain emotional distance. "Because I've changed," he said simply, "and because you deserve the truth, regardless of what happens between us." As midnight approached, the professional pretense of their meeting had evaporated. When Justin's hand brushed hers while reaching for the wine, the familiar electricity still sparked between them. 2 years of emotional discipline threatened to crumble. "I should go," she said, not moving. "Or you could stay," he countered, his voice rough with emotion. "Not for the reasons that brought you here, but because there's still something unfinished between us." The rain lashed against windows as they stared at each other, the decision hanging in the charged air. When Masai finally stood, it wasn't to leave but to close the distance between them. Their embrace held the desperation of 2 years apart, each touch acknowledging what had been lost and what remained, despite everything. Their bodies remembered patterns their minds had tried to forget, finding familiar rhythms that transcended their conscious barriers. Later, as moonlight broke through dissipating clouds, they lay in contemplative silence. Neither spoke of tomorrow or what this night meant, the questions too complicated for immediate answers. "Reed wasn't just stealing money," Justin said eventually. "He was systematically sabotaging your supplier relationships, corrupting financial records to make your business appear unstable to potential partners." "How do I recover from that?" Masai asked, professional concerns reasserting themselves. "I have ideas," he replied carefully, "but I won't overstep. This is your company, your vision. I learned my lesson about trying to control outcomes." The respect in his words, so different from the man who had once dismissed her business model as unrealistic, spoke to genuine evolution. "There's something else you should know," Justin continued after a pause. "When I discovered what Westfield was doing, I considered retaliating through conventional corporate warfare, acquiring their suppliers, poaching their designers." "But you didn't," she observed. "No," he confirmed. "Instead, I provided evidence to the SEC about their pattern of corporate espionage. They're facing a federal investigation now, handled properly, legally, through appropriate channels." This choice, opting for legitimate resolution rather than power plays, revealed more about his transformation than any words could have expressed. When dawn's first light crept through windows, Masai slipped from bed while Justin slept, gathering her clothes with silent efficiency. This night had answered one question. Their connection remained undeniable, but created countless others she wasn't ready to face. She left no note, taking with her only the information about Marcus's betrayal and the memory of Justin's unexpected vulnerability. Whatever came next would require clear heads and careful consideration, not decisions made in the emotional aftermath of their reunion. Chapter 11. Second Chances. For 2 weeks following their unexpected reunion, Masai maintained absolute silence despite Justin's messages and calls. She needed space to process what had happened and to verify his claims about Marcus independently. Her lawyer confirmed the evidence was legitimate. Marcus had indeed been planted by Westfield Apparel, making him guilty of corporate espionage as well as theft. The legal team also uncovered a broader pattern of sabotage aimed at several businesses connected to Justin's empire, suggesting a systematic campaign rather than isolated incidents. Masai immersed herself in salvage efforts for her company, meeting with creditors to negotiate extensions and reassuring her staff that solutions were forthcoming. Each night she returned to her apartment exhausted, deliberately avoiding thoughts of the night with Justin. The physical connection they had rekindled complicated an already complex situation. When legal documents arrived at her office, Masai initially assumed they related to the case against Marcus. Instead, she found paperwork establishing the Mali Foundation, a separate entity from Elegance Unlimited, with her named as sole director, and a substantial endowment for supporting female entrepreneurs in fashion. An accompanying note in Justin's handwriting simply read, No strings attached. This is yours, regardless of your decision about us. The gesture was precisely calculated to impact her, not a grandiose public declaration that might pressure her, but a private action addressing the core values that had driven her since before they met. Still, she hesitated. Her trust had been too thoroughly broken to be easily repaired, regardless of Justin's apparent change of heart. The revelation that changed everything came unexpectedly. Annika, one of her youngest employees, knocked tentatively on her office door one afternoon. "Ms. Mali, I need to tell you something important," she began, twisting her hands nervously. "Remember when I needed surgery 6 months ago, when my immigration status was still pending and I had no insurance?" Masai nodded, recalling the crisis. The procedure had been urgent but expensive, beyond what the company's emergency fund could provide. "You never knew who paid for it," Annika continued. "The hospital told me the donor wished to remain anonymous. But my cousin works in billing, and yesterday she told me who covered the costs." She paused. "It was Mr. Gatlin. He made the hospital promise not to tell anyone, especially you." The surgery had occurred months before their chance encounter at the hotel, during a period when Justin claimed to have been watching over her company from a distance. This wasn't a grand gesture designed to win her back, but a private act of kindness never intended for her knowledge. That evening, Masai finally returned Justin's call. "I'm not ready for a relationship," she said without preamble when he answered, "but I am willing to accept your help rebuilding my business, strictly professionally." His response surprised her. "I understand. I've had my legal team prepare documents establishing a business loan with favorable terms, completely separate from any personal relationship. The decision is entirely yours." The clear boundaries he offered, so different from the man who had once tried to control every aspect of their professional interaction, spoke to genuine evolution. Over the following weeks, they began cautiously working together, rebuilding not just her business but a tentative trust. Justin provided connections and resources, but followed her lead, offering guidance only when asked and respecting her authority even when he disagreed with her decisions. "The supply chain needs restructuring," he observed during one meeting at her workshop, "but not the way I would have done it previously." "What's different about your approach now?" Masai asked, curious about his thought process. "Before, I would have prioritized efficiency and cost control above all else," he admitted. "Now I see how your emphasis on ethical sourcing creates long-term stability and quality that ultimately proves more profitable." He smiled slightly. "You were right. I was wrong." These acknowledgments, offered without expectation of praise or forgiveness, gradually dismantled Masai's defensive walls. The Justin working beside her now bore little resemblance to the controlling husband who had dismantled her dreams. When Empower Her successfully launched its first major collection 3 months later, the celebration brought together fashion industry leaders, investors, and most importantly, the immigrant women who now held ownership stakes in the company. Justin attended not as a controller or savior, but as a supportive partner who willingly stepped into the background while Masai took center stage. As the evening wound down, they found themselves alone on the rooftop terrace of the venue, the November air crisp but not uncomfortable. "You did this," Justin said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Not me, not my connections. You built something extraordinary." "We both know I couldn't have recovered from Marcus's theft without your help," Masai acknowledged. "But yes, the vision was always mine." "As it should be." He hesitated before adding, "I've been offered a position in London, heading Elegance Unlimited's European expansion. I'm considering taking it." The unexpected announcement sent a jolt of alarm through her. "When would you leave?" "Next month," he said quietly. "Unless there's a reason for me to stay." The question behind his statement hung in the cool night air. Their professional relationship had been rebuilt on solid ground, but they had carefully avoided addressing the personal connection that still hummed between them whenever they were alone. "Is that what you want?" Masai asked, stepping closer. "To leave?" "What I want," Justin replied, his voice dropping to an intimate tone, "is whatever gives us the best chance at something real."